So, welcome back, and this is TOL FALAS, and I hope you are comfortable because this is going to be another pretty long one. It's a 3v3, of course, defenders being the blue team and, well, me as the greens, and the attackers being the reds. We have an 8,000 florin disadvantage to try and make up. So let's go through the army compositions, and before we do though, it's a good time to mention the Discord and the ModDB links are going to be down in the description if you desire to either play or become part of the Reforged community as it grows, which is always a good thing. Again, more players, more games, easier to play, etc. Now let's go through the army compositions, and I'm playing as the Elves of Lothlorien, and I did say I was going to play as these guys some time ago, but then my PC broke and I kind of forgot, but this is going to be the time where I play as them, and as the battle goes on and as it becomes relevant, I'll share my thoughts on Lothlorien and how they play. For now though, we'll just go through the army compositions. I've got 2 units of Sylvan Staff Masters. There's one over in the background over there. Very high defense, but they have no armor and they don't really kill anything. They're really just there to sort of hold the enemy back. They're very good at doing that though. They're surprisingly difficult to kill in melee. Then we have a lot of Sylvan Spearmen. They're low tier for the Elves, but for a lot of others they're basically mid tier. Again, the problem here, and the problem with the Elves of Lothlorien in general, is a bit of a lack of armor overall, but they are still very elite. They still have a lot of skill in melee. I've got a couple of units of Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen. Again, these guys are from vanilla. They're very elite as well. Don't have much armor either, but they are still very, very tough, and they will do a lot of damage in melee. Again, the Sylvan Heavy Archers. They don't do armor-piercing damage with their bows like the very best archers do, but they are still very, very good. The firing rate on these guys is quite scary indeed. Also, because of the expense of the Elves, I decided to save some money and bring a ballista instead of a catapult. It's still a good move though, because there's a lot of choke pointy parts on this map, especially on the side where I'm at, where we can really defend a little bit more comprehensively. And then my general unit is up here on the cliff with a very nice view out to the enemies and to our defensive position. If they advance down here, my Galadrim veteran warriors are going to be able to kill them pretty easily. And of course the Galadrim are, they are armor piercing. They don't have much ammo, but what arrows they do have are very, very deadly indeed. Now, if you're not interested in the army compositions, I will leave a link to the battle starting, the timestamp, in the description as well. And then the rest of what I have 1 unit of light Elven Archers and 2 units of Woodland Warriors, which I'm going to charge forward to support our frontal defense, which is going to be manned by Arnor. Ooh. And Arnor have a trebuchet back here with a very good view of the enemy armies as they advance way back here out of range of archers. He's got a unit of Arnor Militia and dismounted Dunedain Knights covering them, so it's going to be pretty safe if the enemy do manage to get in and around us. The main bulk of his army, however, is going to be here, and this is where our first defense is going to be. I'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics of the map when the battle is actually started. Now, we have some dismounted Arthedain Knights. Very good. They don't have hit points. They're definitely not the Arthedain swords or the Arnor swords. That unit, they were nerfed before release, and they were disgustingly overpowered, so it's probably for the best. Several units of Arnor pikemen as well. Good choice for this sort of defense because there are a lot of choke points you can make use of, and as long as pikes are backed up with mass, they will be very difficult to dislodge. Several units of men-at-arms as well. Not quite as good as the Arthedain men-at-arms, but they are cheaper, and of course we have limited funds to play with, and we do want some elites. There's another unit of Arnor pikemen. Arnorian Heavy Archers. There are also Dunedain Rangers hidden throughout the army, which I can't actually see at the moment, but they are there. Unit of Arnor Militia covering, and you can see there's Dunedain Rangers over there because there's well, you can see them there, and then there's also the stakes, so they are there and present. Arnor pikemen as well, another unit of Arnor men-at-arms. So pretty much men-at-arms, pikes, and a lot of archers, in addition to a couple of elite infantry units. Then our final ally, who is across these bridges and in the town, is Rune, and they have a couple of units of clansmen, units of Loke Scion Rim, some Swift Blades, a lot of Nar Rim. He's got some more clan warriors back here, clan guard, so he's got a lot of numerous infantry units. He's also got some very nice ranged support as well from the Carmel's shadow bows. The Carmel's chosen as well, they're armor piercing, so if he can get them into melee against the high elven players' best units, they will perform pretty well. And then over here we have some clan warriors as well. He's got his army kind of spread out at the moment, but he will sort of reform them pretty quickly. Loke Flag Rim, more runic Swift Blades, and then the final units he has are over here. He's got some clan guard and some more clansmen, so he's got a lot of lower tier stuff, but he does have a very big army, which will contrast very well with his opponent, because we will go down over here across the bridges which lead directly into the town, which is the path they are going to take, so we're going to have a nice streets battle. Is going to be the High Elves, played by Dark Elven King. I should mention that Arnor, played by Master Blaster, and Rune played by, who was it again? I can't quite remember the name. Too Many Ducklings, that's it. Anyway, back to Dark Elven King's elf army, and he's playing as the High Elves. In the right hands, the High Elves are a devastating faction. Elder Spearmen, more of a defensive unit, but still very difficult to take out. If they want to establish a position, that's probably the best unit to do so. Mithlond Nobles as well, tough, do more damage than most other sword and shield units. Sword Quindi, you know, padding out the army a bit, of course, necessary. Noratirno Warriors, Elder Swordsmen, classic High Elven unit with lots of Elder or army I should say. There's also a ballista for them as well. The elves will often bring a ballista just because they're slightly cheaper. Then we have the Noldor Elders and the Falas Lords, both of these units incredibly tough to kill. So it's going to be tough. They have gone for a more quality approach. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out against the Runic player. There are also a couple of units of Elder over here, more Elder Spearmen and Swordsmen, backed up by some Sword Quindi. Now we'll move on to the centre, and the frontal assault is going to be handled by a Mordor, as it often is. Several units of fodder, free, you may as well have them. Temple Guard is an interesting choice. You often see the Inquisitors and more melee units prioritised for the Mordor, but they do have some surprisingly good ranged forces as well. They also have some Númenórean Shadow Guards somewhere, but they will be hidden, of course. Uruk Halberds, you know, not great, but not terrible either. They're just going to be there for the numbers. Orc Raiders, there's a lot of numbers for Mordor, but they have also made up for this with some real quality at the back over here. Sauron's Will, Olag High, Halberds, the Nazgûl are in the fight as well, in addition to the Temple Inquisitors and the Númenórean Shield Guard. So he's got one of practically every very high tier unit, and he's also got Melkor's Chosen somewhere, I believe. I'm not sure if they're hidden though. No, there they are, they're over there. Melkor's Chosen. So they've got some cavalry units as well, which is going to be a problem if they manage to worm their way in and around, particularly something as strong as the Melkor's Chosen. And finally we have the strangest alliance to have ever been formed, as Gondor will be advancing with Mordor. They also have some cavalry with these Gondor Knights, again, very tough, going to be difficult to kill with archers. Lots of Axemen of Lasarnak Nobles as well, so they've got a lot of shock units in ready to go, and that's a good choice on the attack. Also lots of infantry and spearmen, as you would expect from Gondor. Guards of Osgiliath leading the way with a catapult, and several units of Citadel and regular archers. So pretty standard Gondor army, only at the back they've got their real damage dealers, and then at the front they've got their standard stuff, but there's a lot of numbers coming at us. So now we shall start, and we shall start by talking about some of the dynamics of this map. So there are several ways the attackers can approach this, and really it's up to the attackers how this battle goes, because the defenders, really, their job is just to react to how the attackers handle it. What the attackers can do, oof, we go over there and see the trebuchet coming in. But what the attackers can do is all three of them can attack at the front here, and this will force whoever's defending back pretty quickly, but it will also lead to quite a lot of, see if this hits, quite a lot of casualties, unnecessary casualties at that. That was a nice hit on the Gondor infantry. Or what they can do is, of course, what they are doing, which is send their flank around to infiltrate the city. And obviously this is going to be what the High Elves are going to be doing. They're going to be advancing across the bridges into the town to attack Rune. And this means it's going to be essentially a two-front fight eventually. We have the Mordor and Gondor assault on the front here, having to use the choke points with Arnor a lot to try and hold back the tide here. But they do have a lot of interesting positions. Like this area up here is ideal for archers. It's difficult for enemy archers to return fire, whereas these guys practically have a straight shot, so they're going to get all of their damage done. But yes, the situation really is going to be, how long can we hold them here? We need to do a lot of damage here in the centre and to the High Elves on the streets. And then eventually, the bulk of my army is staying back, so that this is going to be our fallback point. So it's going to be the front line, trying to defend the farms and the streets, and then the final stand up on the hills. And obviously we can't really retreat much further from where my main army is. I'm also sending across some support to help Arnor, because they're not going to be able to hold back two whole armies on their own for very long. So I'm going to send over some light elven archers and some armour piercing from the woodland warriors. That'll be good against the Gondorian infantry. And I believe Rune is also going to send across some very low tier sort of clansmen, just to provide some numbers so we don't get overrun. Numbers in the streets, after all, is not going to be something which is going to be super important, mainly because it's going to turn very choke pointy very fast, which honestly suits the High Elves a little bit more than it suits Rune, because Rune has gone for a bit more of a quantity approach, and in choke points like this you can't really make your numbers felt unless you try and force your way through, but that only really works with line fights, and that isn't going to be the case in these streets. But nonetheless, one of the things that Rune could have done is get a catapult and put it up here, and that would have made the Mordor and Gondor advance even worse. It would have made the High Elves' job a little easier, but honestly, if we've managed to isolate the High Elves, that would be important, because the High Elves don't really have the numbers to deal with that. But they are putting up some archers on this cliff, so that's nice as well. Rune didn't bring any artillery, but artillery is expensive, so I can see why he didn't, but he is also providing the bulk of the numbers. Arnor, on the other hand, has got a lot of quite basic units, backed up by a trebuchet, but it's going to be difficult to hold back the sheer numbers and armour that Gondor are bringing to the fight. As it stands, it's a bit of a skirmish fight. We can see these Dunedain Rangers. They are taking damage, of course. They're not fantastic at receiving archer fire, particularly from something like Citadel Archers, which are a pretty good unit in and of themselves. Some of these arrows are hitting the floor, which is a shame, but they are also getting some pretty decent hits off. Now, he's leading the way with Guards of Osgiliath. Very good pike unit, one of the best pike units. So it's going to be tricky for us to deal with them, mainly because they have decent armour for a pike unit, so arrows alone, unless it's very high tier archers shooting them, not going to be terribly effective. That trebuchet is going to be key for us though. If it can get some good hits. Unfortunately that was a miss. All three of those shots look like misses, very close to the Gondor spearmen back there, but we need the trebuchet to be working overtime for us because of the amount of numbers that Gondor is bringing to the fight. And here we have some standard Gondor archers. You know, they're not gonna set the world on fire with how good they are, but still, any sort of skirmish pressure they can put down on our defensive line here is going to be worth it for them. Arnor men-at-arms clogging up the pathways. The Arnor men-at-arms are pretty good, but they're not gonna be good enough to deal with a slew of Gondor. Gondor infantry is better as well, and the Mordor army providing the numbers. It's going to be tricky for Arnor to get a cost-effective defense done here. But as I said, I didn't want to commit my army earlier, because if we just bulk up on this front line, we're going to lose anyway. It's best to try and bleed the enemy down. The High Elves, their army is almost completely hidden at this point. They're getting across the bridges. The streets fight is going to be pretty brutal, but it hasn't gotten underway yet. Mordor has sent forward his fodder, and they're just standing here. Now this is a common tactic, you'll see. The Orc fodder, them dying to arrow fire is them paying for themselves, because they are free and it's not worth going after them with archers. So they're here in loose formation, hoping that one of the players is going to use their arrows against them, but it's not working, so they're just going to be waiting there really for the main push, providing a bit more mass for the attack. Now if you see over here, I've got my light elven archers on this hill over here, shooting directly into these Guards of Osgiliath, but light elven archers, the damage they do isn't great, and the Guards of Osgiliath with their armour are going to manage to stand up to this arrow fire better than most. But even so, the damage that I'm doing means that it should mean that these Arnor pikemen will actually manage to hold against the Guards of Osgiliath because of this extra damage which is getting done. And they are slowly dying. There's like 1 or 2 unit models dying per volley, and the light elven archers actually do have quite a lot of ammo. They're the one archer unit I have which has a pretty large amount of ammunition, albeit not hugely high quality. A pike fight, you don't actually see this as much in Reforged anymore, I've noticed, as you did in vanilla, mainly because a common tactic for dealing with pikes is to just push your way through them. But here we've managed to get our infantry in support, so it's going to be a very grindy fight on this front with the Guards of Osgiliath and Arnor pikemen. Both of them are under skirmish fire from the opposing players' archers. Now if we look over here, the Orc fodder is kind of pulling back. There's some Gondor archers coming up, they've taken a few losses. Now though, if we go back over here into the streets, the High Elves are now into the town. There's also like a little docks area out there, but that rarely gets used. If we look here, the High Elves are obviously going to have the skirmish advantage over Rune. Rune did bring some of their good stuff like the Carmel shadow bows, but not enough of it really in order to really challenge the High Elves in terms of the skirmish power they're bringing. And indeed the High Elves are bringing up their Sword Quindi to sort of cover the front, and then the Noratirno warriors are going to, and the Elder Enway archers. So fire arrows are an interesting choice. They're not going to break the runic player, so Elder Enway archers are of course armor piercing as well, so it would be probably better for them to go after the Loke Flag Rim as opposed to the Swift Blades. But Rune are now going to move into the town, I believe, now that they're under archer fire. They're going to engage the High Elves in the streets, which is a good move. You don't want to just sit back and get shot by the High Elves. We see here the Sword Quindi and these Noratirno warriors are leading the way. They're kind of isolated though. These Sword Quindi are going to get hammered by most of the runic infantry that is coming towards them. The Flag Rim, maybe not so much the Clan warriors, but certainly the Flag Rim and the Swift Blades are going to make quick work of Sword Quindi. Noritino warriors backing up, but now also there's more infantry coming in, Mithlon nobles and more sword quindi, so the lower tier high elven stuff is making its move. We look over here, the runic horde coming in. The sword quindi is too light to really deal with this, but Noritino warriors firing into the backs of their own men, not terribly important though, because they are getting some decent work done on these runic soldiers, but that's a lot of runic infantry. It's a good thing that the high elves didn't bring a catapult actually, because this is prime catapult target. This sword quindi is not going to last for long though. Let's go back to the farms and the front line over here. Again, the guards of Osgiliath are still taking like direct fire from my light elven archers basically, but you can see that not many of them have died. 131, 70. You know, they've lost maybe about a third of their total guards of Osgiliath. Considering that's point blank arrow fire on pikes, you would expect it to be higher, but they're tough, the guards of Osgiliath. I would say that now they're trying to use the mass of their units to try and really push through. This is a bit of a problem for us because it's not really something we can do a great deal about at the time being, but we can move in these Arnor men-at-arms to sort of stem the bleeding. These Dunedain Rangers. Most of their shots are going into the floor now because unfortunately the ones at the front have all been practically mown down by sister archers. My light elven archers are now under fire as well. They've finally been targeted and they are terrible at taking arrow fire. You know, with their tunics, they're not really built for taking arrow fire, and they're getting fried alive. But they have done a decent amount of... They've already paid for themselves with the damage they've done to the Gondor infantry and the guards of Osgiliath. This Arnor man-at-arms is ready to reinforce. It's going to move in. My woodland warriors are kind of in reserve. We can see woodland warriors over here. Another unit of my woodland warriors is here as well. There's a fight that has erupted over here. Arnor heavy archers that are out of ammo have decided to hold back this tide over here. Fortunately for us as well, it was the Gondor sort of spears and infantry and the orc fodder, which means they're not going to get through the Arnor heavy archers very quickly, which means we have enough time to mount a more comprehensive defence. Clan Guard for Rune, they did chase away some of the Gondor Archers. Now they're getting back behind the defensive line. That's a good move. Let's see what's going on with Rune and their brutal streets fight now. We can see that Rune are really running all over the place. They're running amok, which is a good thing really. They're really getting into these Noritino warriors with stuff like the Swift Blade, silencing the close range Elven Archers. These Mithlon nobles, defeat seems certain because they're under pretty sustained arrow fire, and the Swift Blades are making it so they can't charge in to silence those arrows, which is good. Now this is not really what I would recommend, this runic sort of blob here, because not many of them are really doing much. They have had victory though, so if they're going to use their mass like this, they should really carry it on. But Rune here, at least the first High Elven attack has been pretty cost efficiently dealt with by Rune. The Flag Rim and the Carmel's chosen are here to make it so that the Sword Quindi and the Mithlon Nobles, really units like that are not going to be sufficient. You know, if the High Elves really want to break through here, they're going to have to commit stuff like their Falas Lords and their Elder Swordsmen and get their archers really firing at some of these heavily armoured units. We can see the Elder archers getting into a fantastic position to do that. If they target something like the Carmel's chosen or the Flag Rim, then they may well be able to save this yet. Clansmen ready to reinforce. Let's go back over here to where the Gondorian is now making his assault on this wider part of the line, which is more difficult to defend. You can see here there's a gap, which is somewhat concerning. However, the pikemen are still there, and we do still have some dismounted Arthur Knights ready to close that gap. The Gondor spears and infantry are going in first. The clan warriors are backing up the Arnor men-at-arms and the Arnor pikemen, so it's going to be difficult for them to force their way through. They're going to be taking some losses, but again, they haven't really committed any of their elites yet, so the fact that they are starting to push our line back, even so, is a little bit concerning. Over here on this front, unfortunately, my woodland warriors that I'm committing to the fight are being targeted, and they're already taking losses, of course. They do have armour, but it's not the best armour, and they are vulnerable to arrows with their two-handed axes, but still, they are armour-piercing, so my hope is that I'm going to be able to get some decent damage done to stuff like the Gondor infantry, and we can hold here for as long as we possibly can, because suddenly on this Arnorian front, it's looking a little bit more desperate now that the enemy are really starting to commit some forces. Clan Guard, they're also armour-piercing, so it's going to be a good thing to get them into the fight against these Gondor infantry. Now that the Orc fodder are out of the way, the Gondor infantry is making quick work of the archers that are out of ammunition. Very unfortunate for us, but I'm now also committing my other unit of woodland warriors over here to this this front with the Gondor infantry. There's a little bit of lag, of course, because of how many men there are currently clashing on the field, especially seeing as we're on highest settings, but even so. These Woodland Warriors will make very quick work of the standard Gondor infantry. Unfortunately, this is what I was afraid of happening. The Melkor's Chosen have seen this gap, and they are very interested in exploiting it. If we get Cav in behind our lines, we're already kind of struggling to hold them back in several places. And with this, and with also that tide of Mordor Uruk halberds and Morannon units coming forward, this line needs to hold for longer than it is doing. Especially these Melkor's Chosen, though. They're getting in behind the lines a bit too easily. However, we do have an answer for this, and that is if we look over here, the Arnorian back position with the Trebuchet. The Dunedain Troll Slayers, they're a unit that I forgot in the unit rosters. Very, very good at dealing with very high tier units like the Melkor's Chosen. Their arrow weight and their arrow damage, super high. Even so, the Melkor's Chosen, we would have preferred to use the Dunedain Troll Slayers later on in the game, but needs must. And the Melkor's Chosen will come under the arrow fire, I believe, at any moment now. Yeah, here they go. Dunedain Troll Slayers, not quite as damaging as something like the Dragon Slayers, but they are still very, very good indeed. Melkor's Chosen are going to be running around, running interference now. That Trebuchet shot nearly got a lot of friendly fire. Now if we look back over here, we can see that the Runic Blob is still in effect. However, now there are Eldarenway Spearmen at the front, and Eldarenway Spearmen will hold much better than the Quindi and the Mithlon Nobles that were there before. And unfortunately, the Eldarenway Spearmen are going to easily defeat the Runic Swiftblades and the Clan Warriors and the Clan Guard that are here. The Carmel's Chosen are intermittently in the line as well. They will do better, but unfortunately not quite as well as you would want. Now, this is where we should be seeing the Runic player flanking around, but unfortunately, he's blobbed up his forces to such an extent that they are just sort of stuck there. Now, attrition-based warfare is something the Elves traditionally don't do very well at, but when they're backed up by their archers like this, with such a nice, juicy target like Scion Rimmer in there as well, you know, the Elves, this is exactly the sort of recovery they would want, because early on it looked like they were getting soundly beaten, but now it looks like they're slightly going to start pulling ahead of Rune if they're able to make their numbers tell. Now, unfortunately, Gondor has also seen this slight gap we have in our defences, and he's bringing over these Gondor Knights. Now, there are more of them, so in a way, they're more dangerous than the Melkor's Chosen, despite being individually more fragile. The mass they can bring on a charge is absolutely devastating. If we look back over here, we can see that this defensive position is starting to get forced back. Clansmen and a very thin amount of my Woodland Warriors are the only thing preventing this Gondor infantry and Guards of Osgiliath from really breaking in. There is another unit of men-at-arms coming to reinforce, which is a good thing. I was chasing away the Melkor's Chosen with my free unit of Woodland Warriors, but really it's a case of we need to damage that Cav to the extent that it can't damage our lines, because over here we may be losing, but we are also holding them back. Unfortunately for us, though, charging into the back of those dismounted Arthedain Knights were the Gondor Knights, and that's going to be bad for us, very bad indeed, because they're almost through the line in several areas. There's a very thin line of men really trying to hold them back. The Clan Guard are now the only ones holding back this section as well, so the Runic players' reinforcements playing a very big part. And if we see back here, Gondor Infantry, more Orc fodder. It's not the highest tier units we're dealing with though, so the Clan Guard should be able to hold back the tide in this middle area for a little longer. Now if we look back over here, Arnor Men-at-Arms. Now back over here, my Woodland Warriors tried to countercharge the Gondor Knights. There wasn't really much else they could do, and they got absolutely eviscerated from the front and the back from both enemy cav units, which are in behind our lines. The Troll Slayers are trying to do as much damage as they possibly can. This cavalry could basically destroy our entire front defensive line and make it so we can't retreat any forces back to our final stand, which would be game over for us. If we can't, you know, my army alone is not going to be sufficient to deal with the amount of men that the enemy have left. Several parts of this line are still holding pretty firm though. The dismounted Arthedain Knights are doing a real number on the Spearmen and the Halberds, as you would probably expect. But this cav here is a real problem. They're going to charge into the back of these clansmen, probably break them instantly as well. Yeah, there go the clansmen. So this part of the line is basically null and void. My Woodland Warriors are the only ones left. The Clan Guard are still holding pretty firm though. There are still Arnor Men-at-Arms trying to sort of chase the cav off as well. The Clan Guard are the one area of our line which is still very solid. We look over here though, more reinforcements. The amount of numbers we're facing is pretty brutal. These Arnor pikemen are facing the wrong way, interestingly enough. I've got 7 woodland warriors just running around trying to do what they can. Let's go back to the runic fight and see how that is progressing. So we look over here, the High Elves have managed to push them back to this intersection, which is a sign that the runic player is losing ground. Having said that, the Elves are also, you know, some of their units are starting to look a little bit haggard. Elder Enway Spearmen, Elder Enway Archers are in there as well. These units are slowly starting to run out of steam, which means the Elves, while they are winning this war of attrition, they are being made to pay for it. So, there goes the runic general though. That is a tragic sight. Where was that? That was over here. So the Elves were the ones that actually managed to flank around. And that is a real problem. The Sindar Blade Masters, Norituno Warriors, but in particular it's the Sindar Blade Masters which are the real concern here. Very, very good unit. Not the most heavily armoured, so archers are pretty good against them, but when they get into a sustained melee with most things, they're able to dish out the punishment, particularly against a heavily armoured faction like Rune. It is a pretty brutal battle on the streets though. And it's a battle which neither one of these guys, regardless of how this battle pans out, is going to come out of looking particularly fantastic. Their armies are all going to be pretty bloodied up, but it does look like Rune is going to bear the brunt of that punishment, which is bad for us because, as you can see from the minimap, the red is really, really starting to pour in. Dismounted Arthedain Knights really trying to silence these Gondor Knights as best they can. This part of the line is still kind of holding though, ironically. We do still have a semblance of a line here. But as you can see, we are now starting to begin our retreat. The only thing we've got over here is still my woodland warriors. There are 33 of them. Defeat may seem certain, but they have actually, despite coming under that withering arrow fire early on, they are starting to really pay for themselves effectively, dealing with a lot of this standard Gondor units. As we can see, all of these units are pulling back to the defensive position on the hill. Honestly, if we look at the percentages, we're 20 percentage points behind. It's looking bad, and really the key here was that cavalry getting in behind us. That really made our outer defence less effective than it really could have been. Bit of a shame, but even so, it wasn't all a loss. Mainly because their cavalry, if we look over here, the Melkor's Chosen, there are only 3 of them left. The Trebuchet is out of ammo now, so it's not really too big a deal. The more damage we can do to this Melkor's Chosen, honestly, the better. The enemy cavalry has largely been spent. The runic player is able to use this sort of escape route to run some of his units away. Got some of this Loknar Rim and the Shadow Bows. They're out of ammunition, I'm pretty sure, but really it's just a case of I need more mass so that my front line can hold. The Lothlorien Elves don't have the most mass. Gondor and Mordor, on the other hand, put together can really just force their way through any sort of line, so it's going to be a problem for us. And while if we look over here, these Woodland Warriors still fighting, still getting some good kills, and that's all I can really ask of them. My Woodland Warriors had a bit of a mixed battle, to be honest with you. Once they got into sustained melee, they were good, but unfortunately they were able to be soundly beaten by cavalry and archers as they went about their business. Got these Arnor men-at-arms running around. So if we look at this defensive position over here, we obviously have a big hill advantage. It's a very defensible position. I've got a shield wall of Sylvan Spearmen blocking the way up, ready to be reinforced with Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen. I've got Staff Masters sort of filling in the vulnerable bits of the line. I've also got my Ballista ready to fire and my Archers ready to target whoever I want. And obviously I've got my very high tier Archers on the cliff. But the problem I would have had is I don't really have the mass to hold back a huge amount of forces, but now the fact that Rune and Arnor are managing to save some troops means it's very unlikely, but we can still do something in this battle. We can certainly still make this defensive position work for us. More runic forces in addition to the Clan Guard are coming. Shadow Bows.
They have lost half their men.
Shadow Bows are pretty good in melee, and so are Nar Rim, to be honest with you. Not the worst, certainly. Particularly seeing as we've got a lot of terrible Mordor units, they'll perform pretty well against them, to be honest with you. Gondor still have a lot of their standard units, of course. This was really what their job was, mostly, I think. One of the things that they do still have are their Axemen, but ironically against my forces, which aren't particularly heavily armoured, the Axemen are not really particularly fantastic. They probably would have been better off sending these guys in against Arnor at the start, to be honest with you, but again, it is worthwhile saving these guys if the last faction is armoured, so I don't really blame him for having these Axemen for Sarnak in reserve. These Gondor Knights, they're still pretty healthy, to be honest with you. That is a bit of a concern, but with the position we have, it's going to be much less likely that they're going to be able to bust through the line anyway, at least in a way that makes it worth it. We can see these Arthedain knights trying to hold back these halberds so more runic forces can escape, but unfortunately for us, these orc fodder units and this unit of very depleted Melkor's Chosen is going to try and halt the advance of these runic forces. See these clan guard, those Melkor's Chosen really getting into those clan guard. If we can save these flag rim, and in particular these Carmel's Chosen, that could be really important, because they're very good units. High mass, high armor, also very effective, particularly the Carmel's Chosen. They're going to be very good against any high tier Gondor and Mordor units that come forward, but unfortunately for us, they have been very much spotted by the forces of Gondor and Mordor, and they're being cut off. We did manage to save some of Rune's army though, so it's better than nothing. And ultimately they will actually manage to do a decent amount of damage to the Gondor Knights, so who knows? It's not a total loss, but I really would have preferred to see these Carmel's Chosen back in our defensive line. They look so cool. That armor piercing they have as well, super important with those heavy scimitars they have. Flag Rim, of course, also armor piercing with their axes and maces. The Gondor player has been very good at forcing his cavalry through situations, and now he's going to be able to get rear charges, which is basically game over for these runic units. The Orc fodder, however, will be cut down to size, so more of the enemy's numbers will at least be depleted. These guys will not die in vain. If we look over here, we've fallen even further behind at this point. So bad news bears for us, and we can see they're all going to be forming up over here, all three of the enemy armies. The High Elf player honestly did take some pretty severe losses of their own, but unfortunately for us, their Noldor and their Falas lords were untouched, so it's going to be a very challenging last defense for us to try and pull off. You can see these orc fodders, Flag Rim, Carmel's Chosen. He is really trying to force his way through, which I don't blame him, but in this situation he may as well just countercharge the Gondor Knights, try and get as much damage done to them as possible, because these fodders and these raiders, all they're there for is just to fix you in position. You will get a lot of damage done to them though, so having the orcs get cut down to size, have some of their numbers depleted is a good thing overall. But they will have to advance through this little town. It's very choke pointy, so they're not going to be able to spread out their advance either, which works pretty well for us. One final unit of Arnor men-at-arms getting in behind. We've also got the dismounted Dunedain Knights and the Troll Slayers, very good at melee, so all is not lost. It does look pretty hopeless, but ultimately we do have a position which means the enemy are going to take some pretty severe losses advancing towards us, regardless of what they do. We shall see. We shall see. We could retreat even further up the cliff, but that's pretty cheesy. And also, honestly, we want this sort of wide defense so that my range can really lay down the punishment as well as it can. Meanwhile, this last stand of this runic elite infantry, the Carmel's Chosen, have been battered by these Gondor Knights. So far, these Gondor Knights have really been the MVPs. The Melkor's Chosen, honestly, they may have managed to get through the line, but they got hacked to pieces by the Troll Slayers pretty quickly. But there was not enough ammo left to do the same to the Gondor Knights, and they were able to really break our front line at the farms. Meanwhile, the Orc fodder has been pretty much cleaned up. The Orc Raiders are also going to take some additional losses, but it's not worth a unit of Flag Rim and Carmel's Chosen. But we don't really have a choice, just try and get as many kills as we can. The silver and gold of Rune's best units. We can also see the Elven players advancing down this hilltop route. Obviously the old TOL FALAS, this was not a route you could take, and there were only 2 bridges, and there was also no other way into the town, so it was very much a map that heavily favoured the defenders. But now, of course, there are many ways the attackers can approach it, and that's what I like about this map. There's no one way to do it. The defenders have to react, and I think we reacted in the right way. It's just the play, like that gap we left, and also the runic blob didn't help us, but even so, I think we still did some damage to the enemy. We could have certainly played it better. Maybe I could have sent forward more men to try and patch the gap, because I did see it, albeit too late. We can see Olag High moving in, Númenórean Shadow Guard, Temple Guard as well, Citadel Archers. That's going to be almost game over, I would say. Sindar Blade Mass is also coming in. These Gondor Knights have lost a couple more men in these charges though, and now it's to the point where their mass isn't going to be too great, and with the thick line that we're going to have back at our defensive position in our final stand, I think we're going to be alright. in terms of the cav anyway. The amount of infantry we have to face, and particularly the amount of elite infantry we have to face. Sindar Blade Masters, there's Temple Inquisitors, there's Nazgul. It's not looking good. But having said that, my archers can cut elite units down to size, and in terms of quality, I think we can outlast Mordor and Gondor. I think that the amount of units that the High Elves have left, though, is probably what's going to do us in the end. But we can still put up a pretty decent fight. It's not completely over yet. Orc Raiders. This is going to be it. The final stand of these brave Carmals chosen. Now that they're armor piercing, they are certainly a very worthwhile unit to get. They weren't always armor piercing, and back then they were kind of underwhelming, but now they are a very tough unit to take on. But unfortunately for us, I think that's it. That is it. The runic resistance on this hill has faded, and this leaves the final defensive position, and there is a bit of a lengthy gap between when the enemy sort of set up their armies and when they begin their assault. So I will make a little cut here for when the enemy starts to really begin their advance in earnest. Just before the enemy advances, it is worth noting this one single Gondor Citadel archer. I did have to use some of my archer ammo to kill some of their depleted skirmishers as they advanced. We can't afford to lose any of our front line after all. This is the one guy that survived a couple of volleys from my archers, still bravely shooting his arrows, and then not so much. A bad day for him, I think. He might set off a few metal detectors now. My. We have some Orc fodder routing towards us as well, which is kind of weird, but again, we'll have another little cut, because that really the enemy are just sending forward some depleted archers to try and do some damage to my front line. They managed to kill 2 of my spearmen, but even so, they've also managed to waste some of my ammo, technically speaking, as well. My Galadrim warriors have also been kind of trying to kill some of their high tier units as they advance, but that's nothing really that's worth showing because it's not really in the thick of it. So we shall wait until the enemy begins their advance once more. So as we can see, they are slowly starting to send in some of their more depleted units to our front line. I did take a catapult shot as well to one of my Sylvan spearmen, but fortunately I was able to silence the catapult with some of my archers. So they do only have one artillery piece remaining, and that is the Elven Ballista, but that can still really just break our line on its own. So my Ballista is really going to have to just be used as a countermeasure to that. This one unit of spearmen will find themselves pretty quickly outclassed if it goes in on its own, but it is going to pretty quickly be reinforced by some Uruk halberds. Pretty good unit to send in first. They are armor piercing though, which is kind of wasted on most of my units. The good thing about Lothlorien, of course, is that, and I think now is a good time to talk about Lothlorien as a faction. I would say they are probably one of, if not the most difficult faction to make work now, mainly because I've always talked about the importance of armor, and Lothlorien don't really have any armor. Now that's not unique to them, and it is possible to make it work. Of course, as I've said before, stuff like halberds and axemen are pretty ineffective against them because obviously they're designed to go up against armor. No armor means basically they've taken a hit in terms of their attack rating for nothing. The problem that Lothlorien often have is that compared to the other two units, well, the other two factions of elves, their super high tier is not exactly fantastic. There's really only one unit, and that's the Galadrim veterans, which I have on the hill over there, which are super good. You know, they have hit points and they're really good in melee, and that's really the difference. And I would say Lothlorien as it stands are kind of just a worse version of the Woodland Realms. The Woodland Realms have got several units like the Elder Royal Guard, the Elder Royal Council, the Elder Palace Guard that are really, really good, and in the late game they can carry you. Lothlorien don't really have that. What they have instead is a dedicated mid-tier, which in itself is actually pretty good for the elves. The only problem is, in a situation like this, because their high-tier stuff is still so expensive and relatively not as good as the other two elven factions, you still can't really afford the mid-tier as well. I know that I had low funds, like we had just shy of 11,000 florins each, so I did have to make sacrifices, but even so, I think that the Lothlorien elves, you can make them work, and they are good at things. Like their archers, the rate of fire on their archers is ridiculous. You can absolutely lay waste to an army that's being reckless with Lothlorien. The problem is, their sturdiness leaves something to be desired, and they're really based around their speed, and obviously in this sort of situation their speed is not particularly important. Sending in some ballista fire onto these Orc Raiders and the Elder Swordsmen. I'd say that you can make them work, and they're not a bad faction. I think they're just difficult to play, and I do think that they could do with maybe one really high tier dedicated melee unit. I think that's all they're missing, and I think that it's okay for them to be relatively difficult to play. You know, they're certainly more difficult to play than, in my opinion, the Woodland Realms. The Woodland Realms, their archer force is so good at range and in melee that it kind of makes what Lothlorien are good at kind of defunct, really. Especially considering that Lothlorien have by far the weakest Elven cavalry force. You know, their mounted archers are pretty good, but, you know, the Woodland Realms and the High Elves have both got individually some of the best cavalry units in the game, whereas the Lothlorien Elves really don't have that. Obviously, these Sylvan Elves was their old name. They are really starting to push hard on this front, though. We'll get back to the battle at hand. My Sylvan Spearmen at the front are taking a bit of a beating, but they are being reinforced by the Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen. Despite not having hit points, they're still very, very good, very skillful in melee. And these Sylvan Staff Masters are really just going to bog them down. Defeat does seem certain, but nonetheless, we fight on. What's going on over here? Nothing? There are enemy forces over here, aren't there? I can see a triangle. Yes, here they are. We have one unit of Elder Enway Swordsmen, quite depleted, so they were one of the ones that really took some of the runic attrition. Still, my frontal spearmen did take a bit of a beating from these halberds initially, but now that my staff masters and my swordsmen are getting into the fight, the problem has been silenced, albeit temporarily, because this is of course just the first wave. I've got my other unit of Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen ready to reinforce this part of the line, seeing as they don't seem very interested in the other part, at least not yet. In reserve, of course, we still have 2 units of Runic Clan Guard, some Gnar Rim. The Runic Shadow Bows are hidden, I believe. Yeah, there they are, and so are the Troll Slayers. My Ballista, I believe, is firing at the Elven Ballista, which is now down here in this narrow street, which works well for me because I've already destroyed 2 of them. A linear target works best for the Ballista, whereas mine are all spread out. More enemy forces are being committed, including these Morgul Chosen. They're a pretty good unit, pretty tough. They have hit points. They're not particularly effective in melee in terms of damage, but they won't die easy. So it's going to be a tough unit we're going to need to deploy to take them out. These Arnor Militia are going to handle this. I'm going to send over my Staff Masters to help hold this part of the line. Unfortunately for me, one of my units of Staff Masters has really taken the brunt of a pretty concise attack. However, these Uruk Halberds are not going to be able to get through these Sylvan Heavies. They're not armoured, so they're not going to be doing any bonus damage, and the Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen are much, much better in melee than standard Uruk Halberds. They're also already winded. So are the Elder Enway Swordsmen that are sort of in there. The Elder Enway Swordsmen, of course, much better, but still not enough of them to really make the difference. Over here, on the other hand, they are going toe-to-toe with just Sylvan Spearmen, and they may actually get a lot of damage done here. Pretty unfortunate for me. Look up here. What's going on with my general? My general is waiting for a worthy target. He did get some volleys off on Temple Guard, which is a worthy target indeed, and also he had to silence a catapult, which is maybe a bit less ideal, but even so. Sending in my other unit of Staff Masters to plug up this section of the line. In Skiltron, usually they will hold the line a little better than they have done here, but again, mass is a bit of a problem for them. They obviously are not the heaviest unit with just tunics, but they are still remarkably difficult to get through a lot of the time. You can see my Ballista, moving my Ballista into a different position, trying to get a better shot. The Morgul Chosen are now mounting their assault, and they are better than my Sylvan Spearmen, but they are out of formation, whereas my Sylvan Spearmen are not, so we're going to need a pretty heavy-duty unit to take on these Morgul Chosen, however. This front line, though, is holding pretty firm at the moment. These Elder Enway Swordsmen are doing more damage than I'd like to these Sylvan Spearmen, but this front line, this first attack that they've sent in, is starting to fall away a little bit. They did manage to sort of remove one of my Sylvan Spearmen units from the equation, but I'd trade one Sylvan Spearman unit for a couple of units of Halberds, a unit of Guards of Osgiliath, a depleted unit of Elder Enway Swordsmen, and some Gondor Spearmen. So, for the time being, we're cost efficiently trading with them, and this needs to continue if we're going to have any hope of surviving this, because they still have a bunch of man. And, as if on cue, the second wave is being committed. We have Gondor Infantry. We have the Gondor Knights being committed as well, which is a bit of a concern, because they can crack through our lines. We will have a lot of men on hand to deal with that though, but we don't want to lose many men, and obviously the Gondor Knights are going to easily manage to get through something like Sylvan Staff Masters, and every man counts at this point. I've still got a unit of Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen ready to go in. You can see these Gondorians now. However, they have strayed into range of my archers. So this is bad news for them, because my archers have got a very high rate of fire and very high base damage. They may not be armor piercing, but because the Gondor Knights have lost all their hit points from earlier on in the battle, it doesn't really matter. This front line is starting to crease a little bit, so I told the Runic player to send in his clan guard just to reinforce the line. Keep them back, keep them honest. And we also deployed these Arthedain Knights over here to deal with these Morgul Chosen, because my Sylvan Spearmen weren't going to do that job. The Arthedain Knights, however, very much will. Their high base attack is really the important thing there. Now that we can see Temple Guard moving up, more Mordor Moran Uruks. These Clan Guard are not in melee yet, but they are still bolstering the line. Unfortunately for us, however, Mordor Moran Uruks coming in is a bad sign. More numbers. We are still trading pretty efficiently over here though, but then that's because Gondor and Mordor haven't sent in their really good stuff yet. But if we can just trade effectively, that's all we can do at the moment. We have managed to pull it back to 19%. It was 24% at one point, so we are fighting well at this point, and that's all we can ask. I do love the Sylvan Spearman look. Well, not the Sylvan Spearman, the Sylvan Heavy Swordsman look. That old Sylvan Elven armour from Vanilla. It's very cool. They do lose out in fashion to their High Elven cousins a little bit, but even so, the blades of these units are still very, very nice indeed. We have a lot of routing units there. They couldn't handle the pressure, and that's bad for the enemy. Very bad indeed. These Arthedain Knights really need to get to the front line, and they are now doing so, and the Morgul Chosen are starting to fall by the wayside. Again, they're a tough unit, but they're kind of on their own and isolated here, so we're able to kind of pick them apart at will. Arnor Militia holding that part of the line down. It is a bit of a fragile part of our line, that with just Militia and Men-at-Arms, but they haven't actually sent anything up there, so all is well at the moment. They're trying to force their way through with pure mass, so I'm just going to send in my other unit of Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen and really make them pay for every inch. They're not going to get any free... They're not going to get through our lines like that. I'm determined not to let that happen. It's a pretty common tactic now, especially with a faction with high mass like Gondor. You can just kind of force your way through, and against the low mass faction like Lothlorien, it's a very popular tactic. But it does also mean that you take a lot of losses when you try and do this, and the Gondor infantry here is going to take a ton of losses. I'm also deciding I'm going to move in my Sylvan Heavy Archers, and I'm going to shoot into the sides of these guys. I'm going to try and break them. If we can break them, then that means that this wave of assault for the enemies has been a failure. And this is a point-blank assault. What's going on back here? If we see here, you can see the Olag High. And this is the point at which I decide to use it. I have used up basically a little under half of my ammunition on the Galadrim Veteran Warriors, taking out a catapult and weakening the Temple Guard. So it is worth saying that they don't have a ton of ammunition, but I am going to target the Olag High, because the Olag High could be just what the enemy needs to force their way through. If you look down there, you can see the gold of the Narum as well, so Rune have committed all their forces to keeping that part of the line strong. However, I am routing some of the Gondor infantry with my archers. It's not the end of the world when these Galadrim run out of ammunition though, because in melee they are the one unit the Sylvan Elves have, which is absolutely exceptional, the kind of thing you'd expect from the Elves. They don't have as much armour as some of the other really high tier Elven units, but they are still very tough. Let's go back down to this section of the line, shall we? Down into that river basin. We can see a lot of the guards of Osgiliath are routing because of this close range volleys from these Sylvan Heavy Archers. Absolutely brutal. The Olag High are now in the fight, but they have been taking severe damage on the approach from the Galadrim, and now even more so. Some of the Galadrim Veteran Warriors are also going to be hitting the units around them, which is fine, you know. Any kills at this point will be welcome. Carmel's Shadow Bows are in melee. We can see that we have managed to kind of split the enemy at this point in their assaults, so they are going to have to choose an avenue of attack. Orc Raiders dying. Also, the Olakai are going to be in melee against something like Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen with a lot of high base attack, which means they are going to die pretty quickly.
Badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
So let's have a look here. We are starting to pull it back. We are now only 14% behind. So, as I said, it's not over yet. It's still going to be difficult for us, of course, because basically all of our units are going to be fighting from now until the end. We do still have some reserves, but not many. The enemy have got plentiful reserves, though. The numbers may well tell in the end. Mordor, Moran and Uruks really taking the brunt of the Carmel Shadow Bows in melee, in addition to the Sylvan Spearmen offering a bit of a solid base. It's not good for them. My Galadrim are now out of ammunition, so I'm moving them down, ready to join the fight. Dismounted Dunedain Knights as well, so we do have a lot of elite units left. It's whether we have enough. And that is a pretty important question, to be honest with you. I'm now out of ammo in my ballista, so my ballista crew is now ready to join the front line if needed. This Arnor militia is trying to decide what to do at the moment. Over here, though, with the Arthedain Knights, we have managed to basically cut these Morgul Chosen in half, and we are starting to really do some damage to this part of the line over here. Meanwhile, my Sylvan Heavy Archers have been targeting for the past minute or so this unit of Sauron's Will, which is basically now dead. But that also marks basically the end of my ammunition. Once these Sauron's Will fall by the wayside completely, that's all of my ammunition gone. Got some pretty high tier targets with it. Olakai, Gondor Knights, Sauron's Will. They're all good things to go after with archers, particularly the Sauron's Will, because they don't really have armour. Meanwhile, if we look over here, there is a gap forming, which does concern me somewhat, particularly seeing as we now have just more and more Gondor infantry and spearmen just pouring forwards. The numbers that are against us are pretty severe, but if we look over here, again, we've pulled it back. Well, no, we haven't actually. It's still 14%. We look here. I'm going to move my shield wall line over here. Just trying to bottle up these mountain Uruks. No, well, the Moranon Uruks, I should say. Dismounted Dunedain Knights, ready to be committed as well. And back here I have my, well, the Troll Slayers are there, my Sylvan Heavy Archers there, my Galadrim Veteran Warriors there, and that's pretty much all we have in reserve now. But we are really doing a number on the front line over here. Especially on this section of the front line, they really don't have anything here. In fact, we've basically completely destroyed the enemy's attack here. Mordor Uruks are really the only thing left alive. They are now starting to reinforce, but this is the next wave, as it were. And Gondor Spearmen are not going to do the trick against most of these units. But even so, they're going to be charging forward. Unfortunately, my Galadrim Veteran Warriors are coming under pretty sustained ballista fire. The enemy still has one ballista left operational. Temple Guard and Númenorian Shadow Guard, they're trying to get into position over here, and we're trying to sort of chase them off with dismounted Dunedain Knights. Because in melee, the Dunedain Knights will beat a unit of pretty haggard Temple Guard and the Shadow Guard. Temple Guard, of course, took a bit of a beating early on from my Veteran Warriors. That's why they didn't have a lot of ammunition left in the enemy's setup phase. These Mordor Moranon Halberds struggling to really make any inroads, and that's mainly because there's a lot of lightly armoured units against them, and they are now, of course, being surrounded by a unit of my Sylvan Heavy Archers. I'm trying to break a lot of these Mordor units, because without a lot of breakage from the Orcs, we still can't really win this. That's half of my army gone. If we look over here, again, 14%. It's not an impossible margin to make up. Now if we look over here, the Elves are starting to send forward some of their better units there. Elder Enway Spearmen reinforcing these Gondor Spearmen, so again, this part of the line is very much a hot spot again. Sylvan Heavy Archers ready to be sent into the melee if need be. There are still some Mordor Moranon Uruks fighting, but I did commit my Galadrim Warriors because they were under arrow fire and I didn't want them to die for nothing, so I decided to commit them to this fight so that we could try and mop up this section of the line again pretty quickly, because over here, with the support of the enemy archers did have to retreat because the dismounted Dunedain Knights did chase them off, and the idea here is that we're going to surround the halberds with the Dunedain Knights, and this ballista crew is going to charge into these archers and just keep them occupied for as long as possible, because, again, as I said, through the trees here, Mordor Moranon Uruks, you can see a Temple Inquisitor there as the general of his units. So again, we're really starting to surround this part of the line, and we're getting a lot of damage done. All of it is really just basic Moranon units, and they're They are cost efficient, but they're not going to be able to beat stuff like Dunedain Knights in melee. There are also Troll Slayers that have been committed to help the Arthedain Knights, so suddenly it's looking pretty hopeful on this part of the line for us. My Sylvan Heavy Archers have taken a bit of damage, but ultimately anything we can do to reinforce the line is welcome. Now here comes the accursed Gondor Knights again, and unfortunately for me there is a way they can force their way through up here. There are units in the way, but the Gondor Knights with the mass they have should still be able to do it. The Carmel Shadow Bows are still in pretty good shape. Meanwhile, my Galadriel Veteran Warriors are right in the thick of it, and that's good. They're in cover behind the wall, and they're going to be able to get a lot of kills done on these Elder Enway Archers, Spearmen, and Gondor Spearmen. So while we have committed pretty much everything at this point, both of our sections of line are actually looking pretty solid. These Gondor Knights are taking pretty severe damage as they go through. The Noldor Elders are still firing, I believe, which is a real problem for us. These dismounted Dunedain Knights were really starting to close the jaws in this section of the line. The Falas Lords have been committed, however, but the Falas Lords are honestly there for survivability purposes. They aren't really something you would expect to see as doing a lot of damage. So something like Troll Slayers and Dunedain Knights and Arthedain Knights should be able to wrap these guys up, provided they don't get supported. I'm running these Sylvan Heavy Archers around in an attempt to kind of draw the fire of these archers so that the Arnorian heavy units can continue. Unfortunately, the Temple Inquisitors, and this is really one of the problems we're going to have, is now we don't have any units to really defend this part of the line here, and they could flank around us, and if they do that, it's pretty much game. There's not really much we can do in that situation. Let's see what's going on over on this part of the line. Still a lot of Loknar Rim, providing a lot of mass. My Galadriel Veteran Warriors are really just ripping their way through most of the units over here. The Elder Enway Spearmen is really the only unit that they might have a little bit of trouble with, but even so, I'd say even then, they're going to tear through them with pretty much impunity. Clan Guard, Sylvan Heavy Archers, Carmel Shadow Bows. This part of the line is honestly going strong. And we could very much win here. I'm chasing down the Gondor Knights with my Sylvan Heavies, trying to silence them so they can't get any routes. Because obviously there's no town centre on this map, so we are vulnerable to routes. The Falas Lords are actually being dealt with pretty efficiently. You know, they're being surrounded. My Sylvan Spearmen over on this part of the line are holding pretty firm.
Our men have slain the enemy general.
There goes the Gondor Knights. He charged into the back and got surrounded. So Gondor have lost their general, Rune have lost their general. Every other general's still in play. These Sindar Blade Masters, going to be a bit of a problem for my Spearmen, but again, it's just about having the numbers, trying to hold. Enemy archers targeting our position. Arnor Militia still in the fight. These dismounted Dunedain Knights are going to be key if we're going to go on to win this. If we look over here, now only a 10% difference, so we've made up a further 4%. Unfortunately, however, while we may have made up a lot of ground in the late game, the cliff is still approaching for us. Eventually we're not going to have enough men to hold these lines, and then that's going to be a problem. So we really need to do more damage than we are doing, but we have managed to pull it back. It has been a rather honourable last stand that we have committed to. Axemen of Lasarnak getting sent in. Not a huge deal, to be honest with you, but again, it's just more men, and it's whether or not we have the ability to take on this amount of numbers. All of these Axemen. If we look over on this section of the line, we have a real problem. The Temple Inquisitors are going to flank around, and as I've said before, in my opinion, the best two-hand units in the game. And there's not really anything we have in reserve that can deal with them. I do have one unit of Sylvan Heavy Archers which is ready to meet them if need be, but this unit of 52 is going to get slaughtered pretty quickly. But I may not have a choice other than to try and just occupy them for the time being. Temple Guard and Numenorian Shadow Guard as well. This flank could be game if the enemy plays it right. These Sindar Blade Masters, 2 units of them are still in the fight. The Falas Lords, however, are slowly being eaten away out. There are Troll Slayers and Arthedain Knights and Dunedain Knights here. Numenorian Shield Guard and Noldor Elders have come in, however. Defeat seems certain for the Noldor Elders, which is not something you see often. The Dunedain Knights doing a lot of heavy lifting on this front, but there's only so much punishment they will be able to take. At this point I have no choice other than to engage the Temple Inquisitors in melee. And the Sylvan Heavy Archers are going to get butchered by them. Temple Inquisitors, of course, aren't armor piercing, which in this case is actually a good thing, because it means their higher base attack is going to chew through the Sylvan Heavy Archers like they weren't even there. I'm just trying to occupy them so they can't flank around. I think my ally is also sending in Arnor's militia as well to try and occupy them even further, because in every other sense of in the two line battles we're actually winning. It's really this flank which may well kill us in the end. Arnor militia though, also going to get killed pretty quickly. There goes the Arnorian general. That's a problem. A real problem, because it means my general is the only one remaining in this Galadriel veteran warriors unit. But on this front, honestly, we're still winning. So if we can wrap up all of these Axemen of Lasarnak quickly, we might be able to form another comprehensive defence. Again, the gap is still 10%. It's going to be difficult to pull this back. Númenorian Shadow Guard going into those Arnor militia. The Temple Inquisitors wrapped up those Sylvan Heavy Archers with ease. It was honestly probably not even worth me trying to distract them. It was probably worth me trying to sort of lure them into a part of the line where there was a unit which potentially could stand against them. There is only one enemy unit in reserve though. I believe it's Lasarnak Nobles. So all of the enemy are now committed, except for one unit. So we have managed to fight in the second half of the battle much more effectively than we did in the first. These Temple Inquisitors though, they're about to just rip my Sylvan Spearmen apart. And this is the problem we have. We simply can't defend our backs anymore. More Axemen of Lasarnak providing the numbers. Sylvan Spearmen are still in the fight. The Noldor Elders though, now victory seems certain. The Arthur Dane Knights are not going to be sufficient to deal with them. The Troll Slayers are still in melee, but there are only 19 of them, so now this line over here is looking like it's going to fall pretty quickly. The Temple Guard are shooting into the back of this line over here as well, so that's bad for us. Having said that, this part of the line over here is still looking pretty favourable for us, because there's no super elite units over here, and all we're doing is slowly slicing our way through lesser units. The Galadriel veteran warriors did a great job for me, I think. Unfortunately, there is a slightly more vulnerable part of the line over here, where Elder Enway Spearmen are making their home. And unfortunately there are going to be reinforcements for this part of the line when the Lasarnak nobles arrive on the scene. If we look over here, the brave final stand of Arnor. Arnor in the early game, you know, that one gap they left really cost them dear, but in the late game, the units they were able to save were certainly a big part of our defence. Rune as well managed to save some of his units. If those Carmel's chosen in that flag rim and managed to get back to our lines, I actually would have fancied our chances to win this battle. But obviously as it stands, the enemy is starting to run away with it again. The cliff has arrived, as it were. But yeah, the flag rim and the Carmel's chosen, if we had them in reserve to prevent that flank, I fancy our chances to have actually won this. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened, because it still would have been extremely, extremely close if that would have happened. It probably would have come down to just like a couple of units duking it out. But yeah, as it stands, the attackers, again, they're going to be flanking around, charging into the backs with a unit of lower tier axemen, admittedly, but essentially my units are now going to be up against the wall. A unit of Loknar Rim and a unit of Galadriel veteran warriors are basically all we're going to have left, up against this farm wall over here. There's still a fight going on over here, but it is rapidly being wrapped up by Elder Nobles and Númenorian Shield Guard. There's still a couple of Troll Slayers left. Well, no, there isn't. They just finished off and died. The Nazgul are also in effect now. So this is it. The final stand. A couple of Sylvan Spearmen, a few Loknar Rim, and some Galadriel veteran warriors. It's not going to be sufficient to win, but it is still going to be a glorious last stand. May as well speed it up a little bit. In fact, that is the sign that the Loknar Rim have routed. And with that, the runic player did admit defeat. However, my units will not rout so easily. In fact, they won't. I think the Galadriel veteran warriors have got full morale in the sense that they cannot be broken. And I've also sounded the rally horn to try and keep them in the melee as long as they possibly can. Unfortunately, with this amount of mass, they are just going to be able to push into my little last stand area. You can see my general with his red cape, still in the fight, facing off against his elven brethren from the west. Look at this, the Gondor spears are in position. This is going to be it. It was, honestly, I think we did a pretty good job, considering we had a pretty poor first phase. The second phase we did a pretty good job in. If we had a better first phase, if we managed to save those Carmel's chosen and that Loke flag rim, look at that. then I think we could have won this. But alas, the enemy were able to make that flank with the Temple Inquisitors, Temple Guard and Shadow Guard really pay. There was nothing we could do about that. And that was the killing blow. I'd say the MVPs were the Gondor Knights as well. Getting in behind our lines was really what caused our first defence to break and fold so easily. So yeah, kudos to the Gondor player. The High Elven player was involved in a pretty attrition warfare battle with the Runic player. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other on that front. And the Gondor player, he did a very good job at bringing very base units, but bringing a lot of them. Because here in the late game, it was really what sorted us out. And here we see my general. He is the last one remaining. He is just getting passed around by the Lasarnak nobles and the Númenórean shield guard. It's only a matter of time before he falls on the battlefield. And there he goes. Defeat is ours this day, unfortunately, but it was a good battle. It was very fun to be a part of, and it was very fun to see the different phases and how the different armies performed well in different parts of the battle. So that is it. As we can see, different levels of kills. So obviously the most amount of kills coming from Gondor in the battlefield. That's impressive for an attacker. Although it is obviously more of a pseudo-siege battle, there is certainly elements of it being a pitch battle as well. But as we can see, the Runic player got the least amount of kills on the field. That's not too surprising considering he was up against the High Elves. You never get a lot of kills against the Elves when you're facing them sort of entirely, but even so. The Mordor player did pretty well considering he's Mordor. And again, I got the most kills for the defenders, but then again, that's kind of to be expected with the last defensive position we had. The Galadriel Veteran Warrior is getting a ton of kills, 449, as expected from an archer unit, but they didn't actually get the most kills, 452 from this Sylvan Heavy Swordsman. It was in that position where they didn't really commit most of their elite forces, that first wave of the attack in our last stand. We did well, but ultimately not well enough. That first phase, we made some sloppy mistakes, and we were made to pay for it in the end. The Gondorian and the Mordor player noticed the gap, and they went for it, and ultimately the cost inefficiency of our first defence, we were made to pay for it. The Runic player also got flanked as well by the High Elves, which didn't help. The High Elves probably would have won, even if the Runic player had kept all his forces there, so that's a bit of a downside for us as well. But ultimately no one had a shocking battle, I don't think. But yes, I hope you enjoyed that battle on a map that I quite like in TOL FALAS. Hopefully we'll be able to do more maps like this in the future. And hopefully the top 10 spears will be coming out fairly soon, I think, anyway. Regardless, that was a fun one to be part of, and if you have any maps you want me to play on, do let me know. If you have anything you want me to do, any requests, I'm very open to. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you join me for whatever's next.